Today's experience was sent to us by a brother, a Buddhist who have this shocking encounter and return with a message for the world to see. Stay. I am Dhru Naidu, a Brahmin from Lucknow, India, and what I experienced during my death has shattered everything I believed about our sacred traditions. 3 months ago, my heart stopped for 6 minutes during a ritual ceremony, and in those moments, I encountered Jesus Christ himself, a revelation that has turned my world upside down. As a lifelong guardian of Hindu traditions, I have spent decades honoring and protecting our sacred cows, but what Jesus showed me about these ancient beliefs left me trembling. The truth I discovered challenges the very foundation of what millions of Brahmins, including myself, have preached for generations. What I am about to share is not just my near-death experience. It is a message that transcends religious boundaries and speaks to the very essence of what we consider sacred. Have you ever questioned why certain traditions remain unexamined for thousands of years? The answer I received was not what any of us expected. This testimony comes at great personal cost. Many in my community have turned against me, but I can no longer remain silent about what I witnessed on the other side. What Jesus revealed about our sacred cows will challenge everything you thought you knew about Hinduism's most protected beliefs. The morning of the ritual began like any other holy day. As the eldest son in a prominent Brahmin family, I had performed the sacred cow worship ceremony countless times. The familiar scent of sandalwood incense filled our ancestral temple, where generations before me had maintained our ancient traditions. My entire life had been dedicated to preserving these customs. I taught younger Brahmins about the divine nature of cows, led ceremonies, and upheld the strict dietary laws that defined our caste. That morning, my hands moved through the ritual gestures with practiced precision, my Sanskrit chants echoing off the temple walls. But something felt different. As I completed the final mantras, a strange heaviness settled in my chest. The brass bell in my hand suddenly felt like lead. The incense smoke, usually so comforting, seemed to thicken around me, making it harder to breathe. I remember looking up at the carved wooden ceiling, my vision blurring. The last thing I heard was my son's panicked voice calling out, "Papa," before everything went black. Later, I learned that my heart had stopped completely right there, on the sacred ground where I had spent my life in devotion. What happened in those 6 minutes changed everything. The truth I encountered was not wrapped in the familiar comfort of our traditions. Instead, it came through an encounter that no amount of Vedic study could have prepared me for. The instant my heart ceased its rhythm, reality fractured like ancient pottery beneath a hammer's blow, not gradually, but in one decisive moment that cleaved existence itself. The certainty I had cultivated through decades of study and ritual practice crumbled, revealing something far vaster than my carefully ordered understanding could contain. I felt the last beat fade in my chest, followed by a silence more profound than any I had known in the temple's quietest hours. In that suspended moment, everything I had accepted as foundational truth revealed itself as merely provisional, like morning mist before the sun. The stone floor beneath me, worn smooth by countless prostrations, simply ceased to be. My body, once so solid and familiar, became as insubstantial as incense smoke. I began to rise, floating past the temple's wooden rafters I had contemplated during countless ceremonies. Each beam and carved detail that had become as familiar as my own hands now seemed distant, almost illusory. The ceiling that had sheltered my devotions for so many years no longer served as a boundary or barrier. I passed through it as easily as light through crystal, watching the physical world recede below like the setting of a play after the final act. The sensation defied everything I had been taught about death and transition. There was no struggle, no resistance, no clinging to the physical form I was leaving behind. Instead, I experienced a lightness that made my deepest meditative states seem leaden by comparison. The sacred thread that had marked my status as a Brahmin, the ritual implements I had wielded with such reverence, all these symbols of earthly authority and spiritual responsibility dissolved into meaninglessness. In their place came a clarity that made my previous understanding seem like viewing the ocean through a clouded glass. Every breath of my meditation practice had been preparation for this moment, though I had not known it. Through the encompassing darkness emerged a light unlike anything in earthly experience, not the warm, flickering ambience of ghee lamps or the golden glow of sunrise, but a white radiance that seemed to possess consciousness and purpose. It burst through everything, not just illuminating but transforming what it touched. This light felt like truth itself, not the partial truths I had taught and studied, but something fundamental and complete. It drew me forward with an authority that made all earthly hierarchies and powers seem like children's games. My entire being responded to its call with a recognition deeper than thought. The most remarkable aspect of this transformation was not the dramatic departure from physical form or the dissolution of my worldly identity. It was the complete absence of fear in the face of such radical change. Throughout my life, I had witnessed many deaths, counseled the dying, and performed the sacred rites. I had always sensed an undercurrent of anxiety, a natural resistance to the unknown. Yet here, at my own threshold, I found only acceptance and a profound sense of rightness. I knew with unshakable certainty that I was crossing a boundary that would forever divide my existence into two distinct chapters. Everything that came before now seemed like preparation for this moment of transition, the step into a larger reality that had always existed just beyond the veil of ordinary perception. The light began as a gentle glow but quickly intensified into a radiance that should have been blinding, yet I could see with perfect clarity as the figure emerged, unmistakably Jesus Christ. My mind reeled at the recognition, desperately trying to reconcile this reality with my decades of Hindu devotion. Every story I had heard of Christ, every Christian concept I had intellectually dismissed, suddenly took on vivid life before me. The figure bore no resemblance to the Western paintings I had seen, yet I knew him with a certainty that transcended physical appearance. His presence filled the space with an authority that made the air itself feel charged with power, yet simultaneously wrapped me in a comfort more profound than any I had known. In that moment, all my carefully constructed theological frameworks seemed to dissolve. The divine being before me radiated an energy that was at once fierce and tender, overwhelming yet intimate. Though my entire spiritual life had been steeped in Sanskrit mantras and Hindu scripture, he spoke in a way that bypassed language entirely. The words, "Drew, you've served faithfully, but now it's time for truth," resonated directly in my consciousness, carrying layers of meaning that mere speech could never convey. The gentle authority in his voice shook me to my core. His eyes held mine with an intensity that stripped away every defense. Here was love in its purest form, not the abstract concept I had contemplated in meditation, but a living, breathing presence that knew me completely. Tears began streaming down my face as decades of spiritual pride crumbled. I found myself on my knees, not from fear or obligation, but from the sheer weight of grace I felt in his gaze. This wasn't the foreign God I had rationalized away in countless debates and discussions. This was truth itself, looking at me with such compassion that it broke open something deep within my soul. The religious walls I had built over a lifetime seemed to evaporate like morning mist. Every argument I had crafted against Christianity, every intellectual objection I had raised, now felt as substantial as shadows before the sun. How had I been so certain in my dismissal? The humbling reality of my limited understanding washed over me in waves. The presence before me transcended all religious categories and cultural divisions. He was neither Eastern nor Western, neither the property of any tradition nor the projection of any culture. He simply was, and in that being lay all truth. My certainty had become my prison, and only now could I see the bars. The revelation hit me with the force of a thunderbolt, shattering the foundations of everything I had spent my life teaching. As Jesus stood before me, his presence both gentle and overwhelming, He spoke words that pierced straight through centuries of accumulated doctrine. "These creatures are my creation," he said, his voice filled with both love and firmness, "but they were never meant to be worshipped." The weight of this truth pressed against my chest, making it difficult to breathe. Everything I had built my ministry upon began to crumble, not violently but with the quiet devastation of snow melting in spring. Then came the visions, flowing through my consciousness like water. I witnessed the gradual evolution of our practices, seeing with painful clarity how human tradition had slowly crystallized into divine law in our minds. Generation after generation of my ancestors, their faces earnest and devoted, added layers to these beliefs. They were sincere, desperately seeking connection with the divine, but with each passing decade, the simple truth became more obscured beneath ritual and regulation. Through these divine revelations, I saw how our sacred cows had become both literal and figurative, physical creatures we revered and unmovable traditions we refused to question. Jesus showed me scenes of unity being fractured by these very beliefs we thought would bind us. The truth pierced deeper. God had always intended direct communion with His people, not the elaborate system of intermediaries we had constructed. Each vision revealed another layer of human invention, well-intentioned but ultimately misleading. In my heart, I felt the gentle but persistent pull toward a simpler truth. Jesus spoke of a relationship with God that transcended our carefully constructed religious frameworks. The message resonated with crystal clarity. What God desired was not our rigid adherence to tradition but our open hearts and willing spirits. All these years, we had been building walls where God intended bridges. The realization was both freeing and frightening, like stepping out of a familiar prison into a boundless expanse of possibility. This divine correction, though devastating to my previous understanding, carried with it an overwhelming sense of grace. As I watched centuries of cherished beliefs being carefully dismantled by divine wisdom, I felt not judgment but love. Each revelation was like a key unlocking another chain of human tradition, releasing us into the freedom God had always intended. The truth stood before me, both simpler and more profound than anything I had previously taught. God sought relationship over religion, truth over tradition, love over law. The cold stone pressed against my back as consciousness returned, my eyes struggling to focus in the temple's dim light. My son's face swam into view, tears streaming down his cheeks as he gripped my hand. But the relief in his eyes could not match the seismic shift occurring within. Every breath felt different, as if my lungs were processing more than just air, they were processing a new reality. The familiar sense of incense and sandalwood that had once brought comfort now seemed to mock the profound truth I had encountered. I tried to speak, to share what I had experienced, but words failed to capture the magnitude of my revelation. How could mere language describe standing in the presence of Jesus, feeling a love so pure it stripped away decades of carefully constructed beliefs? The weight of divine knowledge pressed upon my chest with a force that made my earlier religious duties seem trivial in comparison. Every mantra I had memorized, every ritual I had performed with precision, every teaching I had passed down, they all appeared as shadows now, dim reflections of a greater truth. The temple's walls, which had once seemed to house all wisdom, suddenly felt confining. My son helped me sit up, unaware that the father he had known moments ago had ceased to exist. In his place sat a man simultaneously broken and rebuilt, forever altered by an encounter with the divine that defied everything I had ever taught. The weeks that followed turned into an endless spiritual wrestling match. Each morning, I'd rise to perform my duties as a Brahmin leader, my fingers tracing familiar patterns in sacred ash, my lips forming ancient Sanskrit verses. But every gesture felt hollow, every word incomplete. In quiet moments between ceremonies, I'd find myself lost in remembrance of that otherworldly encounter. The love I'd experienced in Jesus' presence wasn't just a feeling. It was a transformation, a complete rewiring of my spiritual DNA. How could I continue leading others down a path I now knew led to an incomplete destination? The conflict tore at me daily like a storm raging between duty and truth, tradition and revelation. Standing before my congregation, their expectant faces turned upward, I began to speak with a trembling voice but steadfast heart. The opposition was immediate and fierce. Whispers turned to shouts, respect turned to rejection, former friends became distant, and family members struggled to understand. But the truth burned too brightly within me to be contained by fear or tradition. Each step away from accepted doctrine felt like walking through fire, yet the memory of divine love cooled the flames of persecution. The sacred cows of our beliefs, both literal and figurative, had become barriers rather than bridges to God. How long would we allow these man-made structures to limit our direct connection with the divine? The stakes are higher than mere theological debate or religious reform. This is about freedom. Freedom from the chains of tradition that bind us to empty rituals and prevent us from experiencing God's direct embrace. I've seen both sides now, the comfort of ancient ways and the revolutionary power of unfiltered truth. My message isn't meant to destroy the faith that has sustained generations. Instead, it seeks to redirect that faith toward its true source, like a river finding its way back to the ocean. The cost of speaking out has been enormous, but the cost of silence would be far greater. Every day, I choose truth over tradition, authenticity over acceptance, and the direct path to God over the winding roads of human doctrine. The light of revelation continues to illuminate my path, even as it casts shadows on everything I once held sacred. So, what can we learn from this profound journey of transformation? First, take a moment to examine your own deeply held beliefs, not to abandon them, but to ensure they're leading you toward truth rather than tradition for tradition's sake. Ask yourself, are there sacred cows in your own life that need to be questioned? What beliefs have you accepted without truly examining them? If this story has resonated with you, I encourage you to share your own experiences of questioning long-held beliefs in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. And if you're struggling with similar questions about faith and tradition, remember that seeking truth, even when it challenges everything you know, is one of the most courageous paths you can take. The most powerful truth I discovered is this: sometimes the greatest act of devotion is being willing to let go of what we think we know to embrace something deeper. Whether you're a spiritual seeker, a religious leader, or someone questioning their beliefs, I invite you to join me on this journey of authentic discovery. Because in the end, truth isn't found in the comfort of tradition but in the courage to look beyond it.